I got an email from my old friend Ryan, and he's been cleaning out some stuff and trying to downsize a little bit. And he wondered if I wanted an old drill press that he had. I really can't turn down an old tool. I went and picked it up and brought it back to the shop. I found some documentation on it. It's a Powr-Kraft benchtop drill press from roughly the 1940s, as far as I can tell. It seemed to be in good shape. There's almost no corrosion on it. The bearings felt good in the spindle. I brought the motor in. It's a 1/2 horsepower single-phase motor. And it's got a forward and reverse switch on it that works. I'm not quite sure why you would want to run a drill press in reverse, but it has that option. I turned the motor on, and there seemed to be a lot of wobble in the pulley. And my first thought was that the motor spindle was bent, which is sort of a harder thing to fix. In looking at it closer and taking the pulley off, it was the pulley that had the wobble in it and was bent. The spindle on the motor was just fine. So I set off to find a different pulley off of one of my other motors. So there were a few candidates. I wanted something small so the drill press wouldn't run too fast. It needed to have the right shaft size as well. And luck would have it, I found a step pulley that would fit. So I put that on, and it ran perfect. So that was a lucky find. But this will be nice because I can run the drill press at many different speeds. Putting the motor on, it has sort of a funny mounting system that allows you to adjust the location of the motor for the belt tension. And I think I have it the right way. I found some old drawings of this drill press, and it looks like it does go on like this. It seems to stay in place, so I think that's the right way. I put a drill bit in and thought I would try actually drilling something. I am really excited that on September 26th, inside the Maker's Mob, I'm going to finally be doing a series on design. I'm going to talk all about the things that I know about design and how to get a project started and off the ground. The link below. Don't wait because the deadline is September 25th. And it seems to work great. Although you'll notice, you can just see it here in the frame. I was noticing there's a little bit of vertical play in the shaft, in that when the drill press hits the material, the shaft continues to move a little bit before it bottoms out near the chuck and starts to actually push the drill bit into the work. It felt like nothing was broken and that this was more something had slipped inside the drill press, giving the spindle that little bit of play. So I decided to start to try and take the inside of the drill press apart. So I took the pulley off the top. That was pretty straightforward. I tried to take the chuck off, but I didn't have any luck with this. I'm not sure if it's just in there too tight or I'm not doing it right. The little ring above the chuck I got loose, but I couldn't seem to get that to really go anywhere. I didn't want to damage anything. I'll tend to try and give things a little pressure, but not really wrench on stuff. I took the motor off again, and I started to work on I think this is called the pinion shaft, or at least that's what it says on the drawing. It's the part that moves the spindle or the quill up and down. The little screw on the end doesn't seem to do anything. I took the bolt on the other side. I tried to get off, and that wasn't doing anything except moving everything up and down. Then I saw that there's a little pin that goes through the bolt and the shaft that keeps the bolt and the shaft sort of locked together. So I took that pin out I kind of had to destroy it to get it out. But once I had that out, I could take that bolt off. That bolt's really what is holding everything together. Then I could take the little spring cover off, forgetting that there's a spring in there. But it wasn't wound too tightly, so it wasn't too big of a mess when it came apart. I'm going to have to figure out how to put that back on again. Then I was trying to figure out, one, if I could see what was causing that play in the spindle, and whether I needed to loosen anything else to get the shaft out. And it didn't look like it, so I just tapped it with a hammer, and it turned out it was just tight in there, and it came out. And there was really nothing holding it in place. Once I did that, I could take the spindle out, the rack part of the rack and pinion of the drill press. I didn't notice the pinion gear was still in there and was sort of holding it in place. Once I took that out, it slid right out. So I think I found the problem, and it's kind of what I thought it was. This little collar has moved, and it even looks like there's a little hole in the shaft where that set screw goes into, and for some reason it's not in there, so I will have to move that. Once I had that collar moved, I could put everything back into the main structure of the drill press. The depth gauge actually works to hold everything up and in place to put the rest of everything back together again, which is actually really helpful. I cleaned out some of the old grease and put in some new grease and put the pinion shaft back in again and the pinion gear. I couldn't push it on with my fingers, so I cut a short piece of conduit pipe that was the right diameter, and I could use that to tap the gear back onto the shaft. It's not pressed on, but it also doesn't just slide on. I cleaned up the little spring cover and put the spring and the cover back on. Then I can hopefully wind the spring back up again. It took a while to figure out which way to turn this to make it tighter. I think I'm doing it right, but it may still be wrong. And I can tighten that bolt up. I did end up finding a new pin later. I don't have it at this point, but the bolt seems to hold things together. I re-greased a few things that seemed like they needed grease, and it seems to move well. I put the upper pulley back on again, and I put the pulley cover back on again. There's just one bolt that holds the cover in place. I cleaned up the table. It had a super light sheen of rust on it, almost nothing. I like to clean the polished cast iron with something like WD-40, like a really thin oil with steel wool, then clean that off with acetone. That gets you back to bare, nice metal. I tried to see if I could get the table moving a little better, but it was tight. It moves, but it's tight. And if I want to raise and lower the table, it's going to be a lot of work. Because even with cleaning up the shaft, it doesn't seem to move very freely. So I have this drill press, and it can't really stay here. It's on my work table, and I have it pretty much put back together again. So I need to find a place for it in the shop. And I've been looking around, and there's a few candidates for where to put this. So there's kind of a spot here if I dig some of the junk out, which wouldn't be too bad, but if I put it here, I'd have to build a stand for it, and the stand would need to be on wheels, which wouldn't be a huge deal, but because it's in front of the door, it really needs to be on wheels. So it'd just be some work to put it here. Over here, there's a spot, but there's a lot of other stuff here. I'd have to move the trimmer and find a place for that. And I'd have to move or either get rid of the compressor. So this is another spot that could work. It's in a good location in that it's just inside the front door, but it would be some work to put it here, and I'd have to build a stand for it. The spot I thought I would put it at first was here, as it's just kind of an open spot and there's some space here. I think I would hang this drill press on the wall and it would just kind of be a display piece. And then I'd have to build in some kind of platform to put the new drill press on. If I put it here, I'd probably want either the table or the base to be level with the cutting table of the radial arm saws. So that would be something, I could actually use it to help hold longer pieces out here, and I could build some storage in down below. But this would also be a lot of work because I'd have to build a big thing. But it would be helpful, but it would have to be a really custom, it would have to go around the dust collector, and it would have to not get in the way of the door for the dust collector, and there's some power running down the wall that it would have to stay out of the way of. One place that I've been thinking about putting it is to put it on my little short wall here and have it sit here where the radio is. And this would be quick because I wouldn't have to build much of a stand. I could just kind of build a little bit wider platform for it to sit on, and it could go right here. And there's power here, and it isn't really the best location, but it'd be the simplest to put it here. So I'm thinking kind of as a first, possibly temporary place is to just put it here. I moved the radio for the first time in a decade. And it's actually in a little bit nicer place. It was always hard to get to where it was before.
Completely behind financing a transcontinental railroad. Not only because the Civil War was taking place and they were afraid of losing the West.
I need to make a little bit of structure to hold the drill press. I want to put it on my short wall here, but the wall isn't really wide enough for the base of the drill press, and I want to make the platform for the drill press be a little bit more secure than just the width of the wall. So I'm going to add 2 support pieces that will wrap over the top and then down one side to give the base for the drill press a little bit more width. I measured the leg sections, but I ended up cutting them just a little bit short, about 1/4 inch too short. And I did that to be able to get the length exact without having to cut the pieces of wood exactly to the right length. So I attached the legs and the top together. I really could have just done this at my work table instead of trying to do it over here. I realized once I did this. Then I attached these L pieces to the wall, and I made them somewhat square, and I just did that with screws. I can check how level it is, and I can raise and lower the end of the legs to get the platform section to be exactly level. Then I can add sort of a foot to those 2 pieces, which will help tie the 2 pieces together, but more importantly, it'll give them the exact length to the floor. I can bring the drill press over now and put it in its new home. The holes for bolts on the front and the back of the base of the drill press are different widths apart, but the width of the 2x4s will make up for that difference. So on the back, they'll be on the inside of the 2x4s, and then on the front there on the outside of the 2x4s. On the back, I used bolts that went all the way through the base and the wood, just because I could. And on the front, I just used lag bolts into the 2 layers of 2x material. So big screws, basically. I can put the motor on again. I think I'm going to keep a wrench over here for doing this operation, because when you change the belt on the pulleys, you need to move the motor slightly. I set it up for the slowest speed at this point, and it seems to work. I want to make a table for the drill press table and a fence. So I have something similar to this on my other drill press, and I thought I would make sort of a new version of this table, as I now can cut it out on the CNC machine. So it'll have 2 T-tracks in the table. It'll have an insert in the middle that's sort of like a zero clearance insert, and a fence that will be held down with T-tracks. I can clean up the edges. I was a little bit lazy with this in that I used a down cutting bit for everything. So the bottom edge was a little bit rougher than it could have been if I'd used a compression bit for the through cuts. And I cleaned up the insert hole so you can sort of see how it goes on there. I cut out some inserts. So these inserts will get chewed up over time as they get drilled into. So I made a whole bunch of them from the same piece of plywood, so they'll be the same thickness. And I set up the hole for the insert so that the insert will be held by the cast iron table of the drill press. And I cleaned those up. They needed just a little bit of sanding. They need to just fit in the hole, but not so tight that you can't get them out. Then I needed to install the T-tracks. So the T-track I got is a really low profile track, and it didn't come with any holes drilled in it. But this ended up being better as I could put the holes right where I wanted them. So first I drilled a hole for the screw. Then I carefully countersunk that hole. My table is only 1 layer of plywood, so I don't have a whole lot of material under the T-track slot for the screws. I found some really short screws. I think they're 1/2 inch or less. The tips were coming through, and I didn't really need the tip anyways because I was drilling a hole for the screw. So I ground the tip off, which would give me a little more thread in the wood, and the screw wouldn't come out the bottom. And I could sink the head of the screws into the T-track just a little bit more. So the T-nut that goes in the T-track will slide better. I can put the table in place. There's a little bit of a weird issue where the slots in the table are right next to the support pieces under the table. So it makes it difficult to put a washer and a bolt on the underside of the table. So I ground off a little bit of one side of the washers so it would fit next to that support piece, next to the slot. And this grinder is another tool that I need to find a home for and probably do a video about, but it worked for this. So I have the head of the lag bolts in the top, and they'll be sunk below the surface. Then the bolts and the washers go on the underside. So you can see how that bolt head gets sucked down below the surface. Now that the table's in place, I want to make the fence. And it's going to be 2 pieces of wood, a vertical fence section, and a horizontal piece that holds the vertical piece to the table. So I can cut out those 2 pieces. I figured I should use the drill press to make some of this table. So I drilled the holes for the screws to attach these 2 pieces together. And it worked great for this. Now I can just attach these 2 pieces. So because of the length of my T-track being a little short, and I wanted to be able to move the fence as far back as possible, I wanted the knobs for the fence to be as close to the face of the fence as possible. So I cut some slots into the back of the fence to take the space of the knobs, which are what those two rectangles are on the fence. But I didn't quite cut them deep enough. So long story short, I needed to make the radius of my knobs slightly smaller. So I put them on the lathe and just cut them down. So you can see how the knobs kind of fit into the back of the fence. What would work better is to just have longer T-tracks sticking out of the back. But this makes for a nice compact design. Then the insert can go in and the fence can go on, and it's done. And I hope this makes this drill press useful. Here's the pin that I found to go in the bolt on the pinion shaft. I won't bend it just yet until I figure out if it's in the right place. So I thought I would test out the fence and the table and the drill press. The first bit I put in was, I think, is kind of dull. It took a lot of force and it got kind of hot. I found a different bit and that cut a lot better. I think the drill press is just fine. It just needs sharp drill bits. I hope I use it in its current location, but it seems to be really nice. And hopefully it'll be worth having another drill press. Thanks for watching.